Yeah. All right, Joe, say good morning, good morning. All right, Baruch Hashem. We are like Klal Yisrael the Midbar, wandering from location to location, never knowing where the shir is going to be. But Baruch Hashem, I think now we might actually go back to the base medrash in the future, Mir Hashem. But all right, for today we are in here. Again, Yeshikach, I want a beautiful, uplifting, magnificent evening last night. It is a great zechus, Baruch Hashem, to continue our limud together. Begin by thanking our sponsors. Thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Sivan, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating all the Shuman Rashos this month as a zechus for Refuah Shlema for Kathy's sister, Dana Baker Matson. We hope that she has a complete and enduring refuah. So with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Lamed, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Chavtes Amud Beis. We are picking up actually 3 lines up from before the lines get wide on the bottom of the daf. Hahu Gavra, the Shadar Lagit Lidvisu. So we'll say, so there's a story. Gemara tells actually a couple of very interesting stories today. There was an individual sent to get to his wife. Amar Shaliach Lo Yidanallah. So we'll say, here's the case. Reuven is divorcing Rachel. Reuven sends the get with the Shaliach, and Reuven tells the so Reuven gets the get to the Shaliach. Shaliach says, only one problem, Reuven, I don't know your wife. I don't know who Rachel is. Amarle, Zil Yehavala Abba Bar Yumi, Di'ihu Yadala, Veleza Velesvein Nehila. So to which Reuben responds, don't worry about it. Do me a favor. When you get to the particular location, give the get. You shaliach, give the get to Abba Bar Minyumi. Abba Bar Minyumi knows my wife, and he'll go ahead and deliver the get to her. Fine. We'll say first white line at the bottom. So what happened? The shaliach couldn't find Abba Bar Minyumi. So instead, what does he do? Ashkechei Rabbi Avo, Rabbi Chanina Bar Papa, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. So we'll say he ended up finding Rabbi Avo, Rabbi Chanina Bar Papa, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, the Yosef Rav Safra Gabayu. Rav Safra was sitting with them as well. Amrullah, they said to the shaliach, Masr Milech Kamei Didon, Dichiyaisi Abba Bar Minyumi Nesve Le, Velezo Velisvila. So we'll say, now listen to this. So remember, these rabbanim say to the shaliach, here's what you do. Literally, give over your words to us, which essentially means give over your shlichus to us. Give over your shlichus to us. And when Abba Bar Minyumi shows up, we'll go ahead and convey the shlichus to him. So we'll say, so remember again, so what's happening over here? This is a derivative of the Mishnah. Remember what happened in the Mishnah? Right? Reuben is divorcing Rachel. He goes ahead and he sends a shaliach from Medina Sayam. Right? Shaliach can't go ahead and fully execute a shlichus. So what could the shliach do? The shliach could come to Beis Din. He could say b'fanei nechtav u'b'fanei nechtam, and thereby essentially give over the shlichus to Beis Din, and Beis Din could then give over the shlichus to someone else. So that's what's happening over here. They tell shliach, you don't know who Rachel is. You can't find Abba Bar Minyumi. Give over the shlichus to us, and ultimately, again, we'll go ahead afterwards and give it over to Abba Bar Minyumi. So Amalei Rav Safra, Baha shliach shlo nital gerishenu. But Rav Safra said, but one second. This shaliach, I will say, is not a shaliach ultimately who is empowered to effect divorce. Now, Rabbi say, remember again, this is actually very interesting. When Reuben appointed the shliach, what was the shliach appointed to do? What was he appointed to do? Good. Not give a get. What was he appointed to do? Give it to Abba Bar Minyumi. That was the shaliach. So remember again, this shaliach was never appointed to go ahead and deliver the get to the wife. So ultimately, again, so here Rav Safra is bringing up, and he says, this is not a shliach shenitan legerishin. This is not really an agent who was who was created to effect divorce. As such, says the Gemara, how is he able to go ahead and convey that over to the Beis Din to give it over to Abba Bar Minyumi? So to which the Gemara says, Ichsofu. So ultimately, again, the other Rabbanim were embarrassed. They were embarrassed. So Amar Rava, Kapchinu Rav Safra l'tlas Rabbanan Samuchi. So again, the Gemara says Rav Safra literally again cut off 3 ordained rabbis. 3 ordained rabbis, which I will say effectively means that Rav Safra was able to go ahead. Rav Safra uprooted, he upended the halachic ruling of 3 established rabbis. I'm Rav Ashi, but my kapchinu, I don't understand why did Rav Safra refute them? Mika Amarle Abba Bar Minyumi velo at. Did Reuven ever say, listen, only Abba Bar Yumi could deliver the get and not you? And not you? Right? Did he ever say that? No, he never said that. So I will say, again, the husband would be more than happy if the shaliach himself went ahead and delivered the get. Just the shliach said, I don't know your wife, to which husband said, okay, if you don't know my wife, find Abba Bar Yumi. He does know my wife, he'll divorce her. But it doesn't in any way undermine the shliach's ability himself to affect the divorce. And because he has the ability to affect the divorce, therefore what? Therefore, again, he could transfer that agency to someone else as well. Ikida Amri, an alternate version of this. Amrava, Kapchin Rav Safra L'Tlasa Rabbanan Samuchi Bitausa. So there's an alternate version of this, and the alternate version of this, it reads that Rav Safra ultimately, again, he cut off 3 ordained rabbis mistakenly. He cut them off mistakenly. What was the mistake? So the mistake was that Rav Safra, did the husband, did Reuven say to the shaliach, only Abba Yumi can deliver the get and not you? Of course not. He didn't say that. So because he didn't say that, therefore, the shaliach has the ability to convey the agency to someone else as well. Incredible. So I will say, so again, I just want to point out, all of this is halacha l'maisa, the continuation of the concept of a shaliach having the ability, if he's unable to execute his agency, to convey that agency either to another shaliach, that was yesterday's Mishnah, and also in yesterday's Mishnah, which is our Mishnah on this Amid, if it's from chutz la'aretz, so this is b'fai nechtam, the difference is that that conveyance has to take place where? In Beis Din itself. Beautiful. Let's go weiter. Says the Gemara. There was a guy who sent a get to his wife. Let's see, interesting case. So Reuven sends a get. Right, with the shaliach. And he tells the shaliach, here's what I want you to do. Give her the get, but only after 30 days. Take it now, but deliver it after 30 days. So what happens? Something happened during those 30 days. Just listen carefully. Something happened during the 30 days that was going to prevent the shaliach from delivering the get after 30 days, right? Reuven's instructions to the shaliach were, give my wife the get after 30 days. During the 30 days, circumstances arise that are going to prevent the shaliach from delivering the get. So the shaliach came before Rava, Amar Rava, Chala, Taimamai. So let's remember again, going back to the Mishnah, Rava said, what did the Mishnah say? Mishnah said, right, shliach was empowered to go ahead and bring a get from a dinas hayam. Then shaliach becomes ill. So what's the halacha? Osa shliach b'beis, he can convey his agency. So Rava said, Lamaisa, why does the Mishnah say chala, become ill? Mishum da'anos. Because what the Mishnah is saying is, if you have extenuating circumstances and can execute your shlichus, ultimately you could appoint another shliach in your stead. Hanami anos. So therefore, again, he was saying to the shliach, you're also an honest. Obviously, something came up within the 30 days which precluded him from going ahead and executing a shlichus. You're also an honest. Armalei Masar Mili Kame Didan to the Basar Tlasin Yom in Mashvin and Shliach Fiyav Lenehil. So they said to the Shaliach, give over, right? Literally convey your words to us. In other words, transfer your agency to us, so that after 30 days we'll appoint another Shaliach to deliver the get to Rachel. Armalei Rabban the Rava. So Rabban said to Rava, 1 second. But 1 second. Here's the problem. We'll say once again. See, the Gemara is operating with the principle. They both say, what type of shaliach could go ahead and transfer his agency? The type of shaliach who has the capacity to affect divorce. Well, we'll say, in this case, does the shaliach have the capacity to affect divorce? No. Why not? When was divorce to be affected? When was it to be affected? After 30 days. Does this shaliach have the ability to deliver it after 30 days? No, something came up. So if that's the case, he's not a shaliach capable of affecting divorce. And if that's the case, the agency should be non-transferable. Ultimately, again, so Rava said, ultimately, technically speaking, he is capable. He's capable. But because there's a circumstance over here is incapable, therefore he's called the shliach shenit on lagerushin, and therefore he can affect shlichus, or he can transfer shlichus. So now the Gemara brings up a different discussion. We'll say, now watch this. In this interesting case over here, remember, Reuven is divorcing Rachel, but there's something interesting which is occurring, which is what? He's instructing the shliach to give the get when? after 30 days. So aren't we concerned, Rabbi say, that with such a delay, right, with such a delay, maybe they reconciled. Now, Rabbi say, you'll say to yourself, a concern about they reconciled, that's a good thing, right? It's a wonderful thing. The problem is if he decides to give her the get afterwards. In other words, the attempt at reconciliation doesn't go so well. Hey, so I'll say, so now watch this. Aren't we concerned that maybe he's going to be a faiser? Actually, what did we learn? Milo Tanan. Did we not learn? Milo Tanan. Me'achshav im lo basi mikan vad yud beis chodesh. If a man says to his wife, this is your get from now if I don't come back within the next 12 months. Umeis besoch yud beis chodesh, and indeed he dies within the 12 months and therefore doesn't come back. Harei ze get. So that's a retroactivity clause, which we'll discuss this case, and the get is valid. Va'avinan ba. And we asked about this case. Are we not concerned that maybe during the 12 months they reconciled? Now we'll say, if they reconciled, what's the concern? We are concerned. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, V'leichush, bottom Rashi, he says, well, not bottom, but he says, V'leichush, Shemaba bal etzla b'so shloshim, and isyachid imo paiso bal v'have get yashan. So I will say, here's the issue. If a husband writes a get, and then after the get, he is miyachid, he is alone with his wife, that becomes a get yashan, an old get. Look at Rashi, V'leichush shemapayis, B'soch yud beis chodesh, she shows harbe lavo, ve'in zedom l'shloach kem b'dinas hayam. So we'll say, so now again, the issue with the get yashan, I will say, is what happens if halacha l'maisa, he's alone with her, and she becomes pregnant. Now I will say, what effectively is going to happen over here? She's going to have a get that is dated prior to the pregnancy. So when you do the math, if you look at the date of the get, it looks like she had this child out of wedlock, which of course, again, I will say, now, to be clear, it doesn't create an Isser situation, but it creates what we call a Pegam Mishpacha situation. So therefore, Chazal had this concept, we'll talk about this more in depth, of a get yashan, an old get, which is any time a husband is alone with his wife after the get has been written. So the Gemara says over here, aren't we concerned about that in this case of 30 days? To which the Gemara says, So we'll say, even in the case of the 12 months, the husband attaches a stipulation. And I will say, in the stipulation, what he says is that my wife is believed to say that ultimately, again, there was no yichud during this protracted period of time. And obviously, in this case, that didn't happen. Ichsif, he was embarrassed. I will say, at the end of the day, it turned out that the case in question was where Reuven was divorcing his wife Rachel, but she was an arusa, not an nesua. Amrava, im amru b'nesua, yomru ba'arusa. So we'll say, ultimately, again, the concept of get yashan, and the concept, ultimately, again, of a concern of yichud after the get was written, is only a din in nisuin, not a din in erisin, since by nisuin, husband and wife have already lived together. Amarava, ha vadai kami bailan. I will say, here is a, so therefore, I just want to point out, all of these cases were just were cases using or applying the principle of the Mishnah. What was the principle of the Mishnah? That halacha l'maisa, if you bring a get, if a shliach is bringing a get, and he is unable to execute the agency, he has the ability to transfer the agency. Now I will say, the only variable is, where is he bringing the get from? If it's from Medinas Hayam, and therefore b'fanei nechtav u'b'fanei nechtam has to be said, then the transfer of agency could only occur in Beis Din. As we saw in yesterday's daf, if he's bringing it in Eretz Yisrael, where no b'fanei nechtav and no b'fanei nechtam ultimately is needed, then what? You could even transfer it outside of Beis Din. Those are the principles that we are operating with. Good. So now Rava says another kasha. We'll say top of Lamed. Today's daf. It's good to get to today's daf. Good. Right. So ki mashvi Beis Din shliach b'fanav or shelo b'fanav. So we'll say here's the shaila. We'll say, so now when Beis Din, going with our Mishnah, right? So Reuven is divorcing Rachel. Reuven is in Medinas Hayam. He goes ahead and he sends an agent to divorce Rachel. So now what happens? Now he goes ahead and needs to transfer his agency. So Reuven shows up to Beis Din, says b'fanei nechtav u'b'fanei nechtam. Now, Rabbi say, here's the shaila. When Beis Din appoints the second agent, does Beis Din have to appoint agent number 2 in the presence of agent number 1? That's the shaila. Kimashu Beis Din shleh b'fanav o shelo b'fanav hadir pashta. So we'll say ultimately again they went ahead and then they answered it. Bein b'fanav bein shelo b'fanav shalchu mitam bein b'fanav bein shelo b'fanav. To which we'll say the Gemara answers no. It doesn't matter. Once agent number 1, shliach number 1, transfers agency to Beis Din, Beis Din has the ability to transfer to agent number 2 in the presence of agent number 1. Not in the presence of agent number 1. It doesn't really matter. Doesn't really matter. It's good. Let's go back there. Hu de Amar. I will say another case, great case over here. Hahuda Amar, there was a guy who said to his wife, if I don't come back within 30 days, Gita, this is your get. So we'll say, so just to understand, the case in question is, Reuven is going on a trip, right? It could be a trip that even has some level of concern of danger to him. So what does he do? So Reuven goes ahead and gives his wife a get, and he says, if I don't come back within 30 days, the get is valid as of when? As of when? Now. Right? Or about say the truth is, I don't have to put that in there. I don't have to say it. It doesn't have to be a retroactivity clause. It could also just be a situation where if I don't come back in 30 days, the get is valid. Fine. Asa, watch this case. So Reuven goes, and Reuven comes back. And I will say he's literally right by the border of the city. The city is connected with a bridge. So what happens? Asa upaskua mavra. The bridge to the city collapsed. The bridge to the city collapsed. So I will say, so can you imagine what's happening over here? So halacha l'maisa now, Reuven is sitting there by the collapsed bridge right at the entranceway to his city. So Amar Lahu, chazadasai. He's jumping up and down. I'm back. Meanwhile, Rachel's like, did you hear something? Right? Did you? So I said, no, I don't know if she's actually saying that. But the Maisa, again, he's jumping up and down. I'm back. So we'll say, what's the shaila? Shaila is, he's not back, but he is back. In other words, he's back, but now there's an ones. Now there's an extenuating circumstance, a bridge collapse. Amar Shmuel, lo shmei masya. Shmuel says, nope, that is not called arrival. That's not called coming back. Look at Rashi. Lo shmei masya, on the top. Dilamati ad hacha, ve'ein tainus ones, Gittin. Listen to this. So the Rashi explains, according to Shmuel, we're going to see this in just a bit, there's a concept of ein ones begin. Or I should say, we'll see it's machlokes, but ultimately, again, there's no extenuating circumstances. Or I will say, if you're going to give a get, you're going to attach it tonight, you can't claim ones. You can't claim extenuating circumstance because I will say you're making the Tanai. Therefore, again, if you're making the Tanai, ultimately, you have to deal with whatever the ramifications are of it. So therefore, Shmuel says, you're not back. I understand it's not your fault. The bridge collapsed, but Lamaisa, you did not go ahead and you didn't arrive. You didn't arrive. So good, another story. Listen to this case. Very interesting. Reuven gives a get. To the shaliach, right? And he says, or he gives a get to his wife. And he says to her, if I don't reconcile with you within 30 days, for the next 30 days, the get should be valid. So I'll say, okay, fine. Azal paisa velo ifaisa. So he went. Reuven tried to reconcile with Rachel, and it didn't work. So Amar Rav Yosef said, now here's what's interesting. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, Faisa b'dvarim harbe v'hir ba'aleha reim v'lo nisratza lahashlimito. So here Reuven tried, right? He even spoke nicely. He bought a gift. He took out the garbage. Whatever he had to do, right? He tried. It turned out he couldn't reconcile with her. Now, Abba says, let's play this out, right? He says, this is your get if I don't reconcile with you for the next 30 days. So ultimately, again, he tried, but it didn't work. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yosef, mi yarvela tarkava de dinari v'lo efaisa. So Rav Yosef said, tell me, did you give her gold jewelry? Right? In other words, tarkava de dinari is actually a lot of gold. Did you give her a lot of gold? In other words, Reuven, did you pull out all of the stops in order to affect reconciliation? Igid Amri, an alternate version of this, is the Amar Rav Yosef, midi tarkava de dinari by leila meisavla. Habaisa velo ifaisalon. So I will say, according to this version of Yosef says, does he have to give her, all this gold, all these cabin of gold in order to go ahead and reconcile with her? Ultimately, again, he tried, but it didn't work. Ha kiman da amar yesh onis begin, had kiman da amar ein onis begin. So Rabbi say, so here would be an interesting case. So Reuven tries to reconcile with his wife, but she doesn't accept reconciliation. Rabbi say, what is that like? What is that like? That's like the bridge breaking. Right? Rabbi say the two cases are very similar if you think about it. Because in case number one, Reuven says, if I don't come back within 30 days, the get's a get. He comes back, the bridge collapses. Right? Reuven says in case number two, if I don't reconcile with Rachel within 30 days, the get is a get. In both cases, Rabbi say, what happened? In both cases, what happened? Reuven did everything he could. Reuven did everything he could, but it didn't work. It didn't work. So what's the shaila? What's the shaila? So do we say, listen, you now are the victim of an ones situation, and again, yesh onsin begin, you tried your best, and therefore again the get is not valid? Or do we say halacha l'maisa ein ones begin? Right, there's no extenuating circumstances again, and therefore again the get is valid. So I will say the Gemara just suggests over here, this is a machlokes tanoim, as we're going to see. We'll see this sugya. We'll see sugya actually just in a couple of days. But I will say just kind of keep. So we're not going to do the halacha l'maisa on this, but just keep this in the back of your mind for a little bit. Yesh ones begin, ein ones begin. I will say what I will tell you is a profound musar haskil in shalom bayis here. I will say Rav Yosef says, Reuven, you tried to go ahead and reconcile with your wife. You tried to reconcile. Did you give her 3 kabin of gold? Did you give her a lot of gold? Well, say, what do you see from here? In the realm of shalom bayis, a husband is obligated to go above and beyond. Right? See, Reuven says, I tried. So Rav Yosef says, really? You tried? How much did you try? And I will say, in the realm of shalom bayis, no amount of effort is ever sufficient. A husband, and again, I will say, it's not, people like to say that marriage is a partnership. I don't know who said that, but I'd love to meet them, right? And I'd love to see what their marriage looked like. That's what I really would love. Marriage is not a partnership, right? Marriage is a synergistic relationship where everyone has to give 100%. It's not a 50-50. It's everyone giving 100. That's what it is, or really everyone giving 150. I will say, what you begin to see over here is, ultimately, again, you want shalom bayis, you have to put in maximum effort. And just when you think you put in enough effort, put in more effort. And when you think that you're fulfilling obligations, and others will say, here's all the time, right? When people think, a husband says like, I'm living up to my obligations. I'm like, oh gosh, right? Better sleep on the couch now, right? I always say living up to obligations, that works in your place of employment, right? And even then, if you're just living up to your obligations, you're probably not going to be very successful, right? So marriage is all about surpassing expectations, right? Shalom bayis is all about going above and beyond. It's about giving 150% each and every day to make the best possible relationship. And just when you think you've given everything you need to give more. Give more. That's what Rav Yosef says. Yeah, you tried to reconcile. Did you go ahead and give her gold? Did you go? I don't mean in the material sense necessarily, although material sense as well, but certainly in the emotional sense, in the giving sense, in the support sense, and probably yes, in the jewelry sense as well. Right? Ultimately, again, always go above and beyond. Such an incredible, important yesod. And even I will say, we'll talk more about onis begin. I do want to get more into that sugya because it's a great sugya, but not now. Mishnah, Hamal v'mo says hakoni v'esalevi v'esa'ani, but I'll say totally switching gears over here. But great case. A person lends money to a Kohen, to a Levi, to an Ani. Now, I will say, this is actually a fascinating situation. So imagine the following scenario. Reuven lends money to a Kohen, to a Levi, or to an Ani. But Reuven has a great idea. Instead of going ahead and getting paid back by the Kohen, the Levi, and the Ani, instead what Reuven agrees to take is tithes as a form of repayment. So he'll take the Truma of the Kohen. He'll take the Meiser Rishon of the Levi, and he'll take the Meiser Ani of the pauper. These are all tithes that are due to them. So essentially, both say, the loan is actually a form almost like of an advance, right? But we're going to call it a loan, but it's a loan whose repayment is secured by these tithes. Remember, again, Reuven himself is going to be separating these tithes. So instead, what he says is like this: when I separate out your truma, I'm just going to keep it as payment for your debt. Same thing with the Levi, same thing with the ani. So what's the halacha? So we'll say, so this is the common denominator. He could continue to go ahead and collect these tithes as forms of payment with the chazaka that the borrowers are still alive. He doesn't have to be concerned that maybe the coin or Levi died, or the ani became wealthy. Mesu. So we'll say that's the same thing as the previous Mishnah. We're operating with this concept that a person has a cheskas chai, a chazaka ultimately again that they are still alive. Mesu, if these individuals died, right? Sarach lito rishus min yarshim. So we'll say it's actually a very interesting halacha. We're going to see that when a borrower dies, so the loan does not devolve upon the inheritors, upon the heirs, right? We'll discuss certain exceptions to that rule, but in a general sense, heirs don't inherit the debt of their father. So therefore, again, Abba say in this case over here, if Reuven knows that halacha l'maisa, the Kohen, the Levi, the ani died, he can't continue to keep the tithes. Rather, instead, what does he have to do? He has to ask permission, ultimately again from the inheritors. So and halacha l'maisa, if they give him the permission, then he could go ahead and continue to collect. Look at Rashi, almost right across from Rashi. Litor rishus min yarshim. Rashi says, "Mipnei she'in chov ze mutal aleim lifroa yitor rishus imrotzim sheis kabo chovo b'shvilam Yaakov." Supposed to listen to this. Now again, we'll discuss that there are times in which inheritors do inherit the debt of their father, and there are times where they don't. But it's just about a situation where they don't. So again, Reuven, the lender, can say, listen, your father borrowed money from me. I would like to continue to hold on to these tithes as payment for the debt. If they give permission, he could continue to do so. So the Gemara says, however, if Reuven lent these individuals money in the presence of Beis Din, he could continue to collect the debt even once they have already died. Incredible. Gemara. So the Gemara says, so we'll say it's actually really an incredible Gemara if you think about it. So what we're advancing over, we'll say is like this. And actually, if you think about it, this is a great way to lend money to Kohanim, Leviim, and Aniyim. Right? A really great way, because you could essentially secure the debt. But what it sounds like over here is, so imagine the following situation: Reuven lends money to Aaron HaKohen, right? Aaron gets the money. So now Reuven says, okay, I'm just going to keep your truma. So we'll say what it sounds like over here is that Reuven literally could just keep the truma. He doesn't have to dispense it. He doesn't have to separate it. He could just keep it. To Gemara says, Afa gavdol asili yadei. So we'll say, so is that true? That Reuven could keep the truma without ever giving it to the Kohen? Is that true? So the Gemara says, Rashi says, Rashi says, the Kohen v'achsiyuma. So we'll say, it sounds like over here, Reuven doesn't have to take the truma, give it to Aaron, and then Aaron gives it back. Rather, what could happen over here? Reuven just keeps it. Is that true? The Gemara says, Ushmuel Amar. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav. Rav says, what's the case? B'makire kahuna ulavia. We're talking about, we'll say, where Reuven normally gave, is what I was saying. There was this concept, Makire Kuna Levia means, and this must have been fairly common, where Yisrael would regularly give their tithes to a particular Kohen and Levi. Which, so I'll say, so like we have a relationship. Well, so you know where this could come up? We're going to have this game. So in the Beis HaMikdash, let's say you have a family where one side of the family are Kohanim or Leviim, and the other side is not. So if you're the Yisrael side, it might be very common to give your Trumas and Maestros to your own mishpacha. That would be a concept of makire kahuna olavia, where you have a relationship. So therefore, I will say, Rav says, because this was someone ultimately, again, who Reuven regularly gave his Trumas and Maestros to, therefore, halacha l'maisa, ultimately, again, because that relationship was established, it's as if Reuven has already dispensed the truma to this particular Kohen, and therefore he's able to retain it. Shmuel says, Shmuel says, no. The case is where, again, the truma does have to reach the hand of the Kohen. So what does Reuven do? Reuven has essentially a third party go ahead and acquire it on behalf of the Kohen, and after that occurs, then what does Reuven do? He takes it right back. Takes it right back. So that's Rav. That's Shmuel. Ula Amar. So the Gemara says, Ula Amar Hamani. Rabbi Yossi Hida Amar. Asu esheina zocha kizocha. Chazal made a special halacha over here. We'll say that what? That halacha l'maisa, Chazal made it that someone acquired something even though he didn't acquire it. In other words, Chazal made it that it's as if the Kohen acquired the truma even though he didn't actually acquire the truma. So we'll say, so three approaches as to what is the mechanism over here for the Yisrael acquiring the truma. Again, Rav says, it's a case of makire kahuna. Reuven normally gives his truma to this Kohen, and therefore, again, it's as if he's given it, even though he has not actually transferred it. Shmuel, you got to actually transfer it to a third party, acquire it on behalf of the Kohen, and then take it back. Ula, ultimately, Chazal made it as if the Kohen acquired it, even though he didn't actually acquire it. So Kuluk Rav lo Omri Makir lo Katani. So all the other opinions don't hold like Rav because the Mishnah doesn't make any comment or any mention of Makire. Kishmuel lo Kamri Mizaka lo Katani. Furthermore, they don't say like Shmuel because the Mishnah doesn't make any reference or any mention of Mizaka. Kiula Nami lo Omri Ki Yechidai lo Makminon. Also, they don't agree with Ula because they don't want to go ahead and align with a singular opinion. So bottom line, halacha l'maisa, the Gemara gives me three different answers as to the mechanism of truma conveyance when accepting truma ultimately again as a form of payment for a debt. Tan Rabbanon, Hamal ma'os es kohen v'esali v'esani. So we'll say now the Brisa goes same case as the Mishnah. Reuven is lending money to a Kohen, to a Levi, to an Ani. Lios mafresh le'mechelkan, and again it's with the understanding that he's going to keep the tithes as the form of repayment. So what's talacha? He could continue to keep the tithes as a form of repayment with the chazaka that they are still alive. Uposek iman kishar hazol. Now, we'll say it's very interesting, and he can establish that. We'll say that he can establish a cheap price, a low price for the produce. You will say, obviously, how long does Reuven get to go ahead and keep the truma of the Kohen? How long? Until the debt, right, is paid off, which means so you have to attach the valuation to the produce. So how do you establish valuation? So the Gemara says Reuven could go ahead and they could establish a price. They could lock in a price, and they could lock in even the lowest price. I will say, obviously, if they lock in a lower value of produce of truma, then what will that allow Reuven to do? What will that allow Reuven to do? Collect it for longer. To which the Gemara says, and ultimately, again, there's no interest issue over here. We'll talk about that. Shemitah does not cancel this debt. And ultimately, again, if he wants to renege, he can't renege. If ultimately, again, the owners of this debt despair from going in and collecting it, in mafresh shalein, ultimately, you can no longer go ahead and collect the tithes, because ultimately, again, you can't go ahead and collect tithes for a lost debt. Again, we'll define all of this. Amarar, so let's analyze each of these statements. Amarar, you can go ahead and establish a lower price for the produce. Pshita, that's obvious. So both say what the Brisa is teaching me is, even if you did not go ahead and establish a lower price, halacha l'maisa, ultimately, again, it's as if the lower valuation of the produce is locked in for such a transaction. There's no interest issue over here. Why not? So the Gemara says, my timer. So we'll say now, just understand, what's the potential interest issue over here? So Rashi actually points this out, that halacha l'maisa in general, if you're going to pay back in produce, you have to wait for real prices of produce before measuring it for repayment. Otherwise, the concern is you're going to get more than you're entitled to for the payment of your debt. That's an issue of interest. Yet, interestingly enough, we see over here that halacha l'maisa, the laws of interest don't apply. My timer, kevan dechi lesle lo yohev ki isli nami ema mishum ribis. So I'll say ultimately, again, it's actually very interesting. So since halacha l'maisa, when there is no produce to be given, ultimately, again, nothing is given to the Kohen. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, even when he has, there's no ribis. In other words, Rabbi say, since essentially, again, this is not necessarily a case in which repayment is going to be tendered, therefore, halacha l'maisa, no ribis issue. Fine. Again, we're not going to get into the halachos of ribis right now, but we'll suffice at that. Shemitah does not go ahead and cancel such a debt. Why not? the lo karina be lo yigos. This is very interesting. When does Shemitah cancel a debt? When ultimately, again, it is a debt where the lender is going to collect it from the borrower. I will say, is this a case where the lender is collecting it from the borrower? No. Why? Because how is repayment being affected over here? How is it being affected? Ultimately, again, lender is keeping that which is already in his possession. So therefore, because it doesn't satisfy the criteria of lo yigos, therefore Shemitah doesn't cancel it. Then balachzer eno chozer, and if someone wants to renege, you can't renege. Amar Papa, who's reneging? Lo shanu ela balabayis bekoin. So both say Ruvain can't renege on the arrangement. So in other words, lender can't renege on the arrangement with the borrower. But borrower can renege on lender. Now we'll say what this means is as follows: that halacha l'maisa, what this means is Ruvain, the lender, can't change the terms of the debt. In other words, he can't say, Cohen, you know what? I don't want Shum anymore. I want money. I want money. He can't do that. He can't do that. But Cohen, borrower, does have the ability to do that. If he wants to say, you know what, I'd like to pay you with money and not have my truma portion held on to by you, then ultimately, again, he has the ability to do. Good. Weiter. We'll say ultimately, again, if the owners, right, if the owners despaired, right, of collecting the debt, you can no longer go ahead and collect the debt from Truma, because ultimately, again, you can't go ahead and collect on the oven, on that which is lost. So I will say, what this means is as follows. So I will say, so for example, I skipped it actually before. For example, let's say Reuven lent Cohen $1,000, and we'll say, let's say again, the expectation from that year was that Truma was going to be worth $1,000, a big crop. Truma was going to be worth $1,000, and then what happens? A windstorm, locust, something destroys the crop. So now Reuven is not going to have that. So we'll say Reuven despairs. He's miyaish about being able to go ahead and collect his debt from the crop. And then I will say something amazing happens. Baruch Hashem, some miracle grow, and the crop blossoms. The crop blossoms. Halacha l'maisa, he can't collect from the Truma anymore. Why? Because since he had Yeosh, since he had given up on the possibility ultimately of collecting, once he was Miyayish, he cannot collect anymore. To which Gemara says, Pshita, it's kind of obvious. No, again, in general, once you have Yeosh on something, you can't go ahead and collect it. To which the Gemara says, Pshita lo tzricha da'akun. Stalks were already formed. Ma'al detema kansa milsi. Ahmed will say, maybe since the stalks had already grown, maybe his yeosh is not a real yeosh, since there was some semblance of growth that was already there. Kamash no. Kamash will say yeosh is yeosh is yeosh, and once you despair of collecting the debt, therefore again the arrangement is void. Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Hamalva Mausas HaKohen v'Asalevi beBezdin umesu mafresh lehem becheskas oso hashevet v'asani beBezdin umeis mafresh lehem becheskas ani Yisrael. So I'll say, now listen to this. Reuven lends a Kohen, a Levi, or a Yisrael in Bezdin. So I'll say, now this debt is occurring in Bezdin. So what happens? Now I'll say, now the borrower, the Kohen, the Levi, Yisrael, whose tithes were being seized by Reuven, the lender, as satisfaction of the debt. So now these individuals die. They die. So what's Talach? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, Reuven could continue to collect the debt on behalf of Shevet Levi. On behalf of Shevet Levi. Or he could continue to go in and collect the debt on behalf of Aniye Yisrael. Now, what does that mean? Look at Rashi. Both side from the bottom of Rashi. Osa Shevet, Shakarov Lamba, Osa Shevet, Riley Yarsham, the Cholavim Zocham Maisos, Levichach, Yaakov Zes Maisos, Bashila Karvala Bivia. So essentially, both side. So what Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov seems to say is that Halacha L'Maisa, there's the community of Shevet Levi. So since there are relatives of this individual, he continues to hold on to the Truma, to the Meiser, we'll call it on behalf of the rest of Shevet Levi, or again on behalf of the rest of Aniyim. Now we'll say, now we'll see what this means in just a moment. Actually, look at Rashi. So he says over here, Becheskas ani Yisrael, hachalek lamer becheskas yorshish v'yorshin ashirmim, aval becheskas sharnim yafrish, yakim deholva takanas aniyim hu v'neichalu l'chol niYisrael shitei das nagis. And we'll say, let's analyze what this means. What does this mean? What does it mean? He's holding on to the Truma Meiser on behalf of Levi, on behalf of the Niyim. Let's remember again. It is for the benefit of Kohanim, Leviim, and Daniim that Reuven what? Continue to get paid for his debt. Why is it in their benefit? I both say, I don't know, it's interesting, but it would seem to be if you're a Kohen or you're a Levi or you're a Yisrael, this is a very important mechanism to securing credit, to securing money. Right? I will say, because think about it for just a moment. If you're a Levi, you're from Shevet Levi, I will say, what assets do you have? Again, in biblical Israel, at least you probably didn't have real estate, right? Because Shevet Levi doesn't have land. And if you're an ani, you really don't have anything. So we'll say, what can you leverage to obtain a loan? Well, what you do have is you have an income stream. You have an income stream. What is that income stream called? It's called Truma, Meiser, and Meiser Ani. So I will say, so what Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov is saying is like this. If Reuven lent money, it's in Shevet Levi's interest that he gets paid. And it's in the Aniyei Yisrael's interest that he gets paid. Because if a guy knows that he could go ahead and lend money to a Kohen, to a Levi Yisrael, and keep Truma, Meiser Rishon, Meiser Ani, as long as needed to satisfy his debt, he'll lend money. But if he knows that if the guy dies, that's it, he's done, he's going to be a bit more reluctant to lend money. Therefore, Rabbi ben Yaakov says, if you lent in Beis Din, you could continue to collect. He could go ahead and continue to collect his money, right? Becheskas, the chazaka of aniyim of the world. What does that mean? What's the difference between these two opinions? Amud Beis, ikabenayu aniyei kusim. Well, it's interesting. The difference to be is what happens if you lent money to a kusi. So ultimately, I'm about to say a kusi is not a member of Klal Yisrael according to this approach, but a kusi ultimately again is aniyei olam. Aniyei olam. So we'll say it's a general benefit to the poor. The idea of Osai being, the idea is that if you lent money to a Kohen, a Levi or an Ani, and they died, and you did this in Beis Din, you could continue to collect your debt ultimately, and because it's a benefit. It's a benefit to the Kohanim, to the Leviim, and to the Aniyim. Shira Ani. So I'll say, now listen to this. What happens if the Ani becomes rich? Very interesting. So I'll say, listen to this case. Reuven lent money to Ani, to a poor man. So right, the arrangement they have is that Ani is going to go ahead and relinquish his Meiser Ani, and ultimately that's going to be the form of the repayment. Fine. Now we'll say what happens. Baruch Hashem, the Ani becomes rich. So in Mafresh Shalav, ultimately again, Reuven can no longer keep Meiser Ani, of course. V'zacha hala b'masha biyado. Wow. Listen to this, we'll say, and the Ani is no longer obligated to go ahead and repay the debt. Let's say, is that not wild? Is that not absolutely wild? Right? Why is Ani not obligated? We'll say, look at Rashi. Last white line in Rashi. V'zacha hala b'masha biyado. Halo v'hazeh enu chayiv lifrosh mishalo. Shelaval menashalo lifrom heno. We'll say, listen to this. So what's the halacha? When Reuven lent this Ani the money, we'll say, how was the transaction structured? How was it structured? That what would Reuven get repayments from? From what? Meiser Ani. That was the transaction. They will say, guess what? There's no longer any Meiser Ani, right? That well has dried up. And as such, again, Reuven no longer could keep Meiser Ani, and Ani is not obligated to pay Reuven from any other source. Why? Because that was not the structure of the agreement. It will say, now watch this. Here's what's interesting about this. Why is it in the case of death, right? In the case of death, where Reuven died, right? Let's say again, Ani died. So what do we just learn in the Bryce? What happens if the Ani died? And let's say again the loan was done in Beis Din. What happens? What could Reuven do? Reuven could continue to keep Meiser Ani, right? He could continue to keep Meiser Ani. Yet, if Ani becomes rich, what are Reuven's options? Zero. So why is it that if the Ani dies, the rabbis provided the ability for Reuven to continue to keep Meiser Ani to pay off his debt, but yet if Ani becomes wealthy, that's it. There's no more Meiser Ani. Why is that? So why did the rabbis create a remedy in a case of death? And why, when Ani becomes rich, they didn't create a mechanism? Well, this is incredible. Very simple. Misa shchicha, ashiras lo shchicha. That's the answer I'll say. Death is very common. Becoming wealthy is very uncommon. So Rabbi say, therefore, again, Chazal legislated a remedy in a case, ultimately, again, of a common situation. So therefore, if the ani dies, we want to protect the lender. The chances of the ani becoming wealthy, so Rabbi say, that ultimately is much more foreign. Amra Papa, Hanu Darmin is what people say. Famous saying, Chavrich meis asher. If you hear your friend died, believe it. Is asher? Lo asher. If you hear your friend became wealthy, don't believe it. It sounds better in the, I guess in the Aramaic. I would say, but an interesting idea. I just will point out also, this is also an incredibly important yesod, which is, I think, also one of the interesting things, because I feel old when I speak like this, but you see a lot with younger people, that younger people often have these dreams and expectations of instantaneous wealth. Right, and I think it's many times often in our communities, everybody knows that guy. What people don't realize is that for that guy, there's 1,000 other people who didn't have this meteoric rise. And it's so important. The Chazal are telling us is, again, right, Baruch Hashem, there are people who are blessed with wealth, right, and there are people who aren't. And just because a person isn't, shouldn't Chas V'Shalom think that somehow that's a lack of success in life as well. Because ultimately, again, Ashirus is not Shchiach. There are wealthy people, but Baruch Hashem, that's not the norm. That's not the norm, right? The norm is ultimately, again, for people, Baruch Hashem, to put in their shtadlus, to do their hard work, to hopefully be blessed with parnasa, But again, Ashirus is not the norm. And it's so important because so often, I think, especially in our communities, there's a feeling of if you don't make it big, then you're just not a success. And that's not true. That's not true. A Jew who puts in effort, and a Jew who is honest, and a Jew who, Baruch Hashem, works hard and makes a parnasa and carves out time, ultimately, again, for his spirituality, for his holiness, that's successful living. Some are blessed with Ashirus, some are not. Those who are Baruch Hashem are successful, but even those who aren't are also equally as successful. An important yesod. Let's go weiter. They need to start making these pages much shorter. That's good. Simon says, Charles, Mace. So we'll say ultimately again, if the ani dies, ultimately you have to take rishus. You have to take rishus ultimately again from Beis to continue to collect. Tanya, Rabbi Omer, Yarshin Shiyarshu. So ultimately again, right? If inheritors inherited, Umi Ika Yarshin Delo Yarsi. Are there such a thing as inheritors who don't inherit? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan, Shiyarshu Karka, Velo Shiyarshu Ksafim. So we'll say this is very interesting. Halacha Lamaisa. We're going to see now a fundamental distinction. We'll probably get more into it tomorrow. But I'll just point out something very interesting. When a father dies, do his sons inherit the obligation to pay off his debt? Rabbi say we are going to see it depends. What does it depend on? Whether or not they inherit real property. If they inherit real property, because debt is generally secured by real property, which means that they inherited encumbered property. If they inherited encumbered property, there's an obligation to pay off the debt. If they did not inherit real property, then halacha l'maisa, there is not necessarily an obligation to pay off the debt. Maybe there's a mitzvah, like it's a nice thing, but there's not an obligation. I'll just point out to you how interesting this is. You could have a case of Yarshim who inherit $1 million cash. Right? Let's say they inherit a savings account from their father. There would be no obligation to go ahead and pay off the debts. Yet if they inherit a little parcel of land, suddenly again, because of the presence of real property, there is an obligation. Rabbi, we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up in Raz Hashem with this tomorrow. Don't worry about it. If you notice, tomorrow, very short Amud Aleph. Don't look at Amud Beis. But right, very, very short Amud Aleph. And Raz Hashem will catch up with everything tomorrow. Shkoyach. Huh? I don't know how to rub it so much. No, gosh, coffee. It's hard just thinking about the rubbing. I got your message.
There's no worry. I know it could be next week.
No, I'll catch up with you.
Is there share tonight? Everybody's already hitting me up.
Vada.
You're going to be up for it?
You don't cancel.
Food from last night, right?
I assume so. There's got to be. Just ask John.
Very nice.